Okay, we are going to start from essentially the end of Perek Tes, going into Perek Yud. The last thing that we discussed was the event in which Ham had walked in on Noach after he had gotten drunk and had become unclothed. Ham, either with Canaan or by himself, castrated Noach, and as a result, Noach had cursed Canaan, the fourth son of Ham. Shem was put on a pedestal. Yafes was on a lower pedestal, so like the Olympics, I guess, the gold, silver, and bronze. And you had page 45 on the page was. So you had Shem had risen to the top, Yafes to the second, and Ham was the lowest level, and then Canaan would have been like the lowest of Ham. And we ended last time just by focusing on how the curse to Canaan is not a curse in the sense that you're irreparably damaged. On the contrary, it's a statement of being. It's more of a revelation of how to best deal with you. And as we'll discuss later on, Eliezer, who is a descendant of Canaan, ultimately, through his servitude to Avram, actually achieves the status of being blessed and merits the next world with all the bells and whistles. Eliezer is up there with the greatest of the great people. So it's clear that the curse does not mean you're hopeless and it's your redemptionless. It just means your path has to be done in a particular way. What does come out, and what I want to start this tonight with, this ended the ability for all mankind to be what we'll refer to as the chosen people, or the Jewish people, or the ones to actualize the full purpose of creation. Because once there was the reset, and Noah could have been what we'll refer to as the Avraham, and when he failed, so there was still a chance for his three sons to each form a branch of that, and that would still be the sum total of mankind. But after this event, where Ham solidifies himself at a lower level, Yefes, by not jumping to grab the cloth, but only tagging along to Shem, knocked himself out. Only Shem now has the ability to become the chosen people, now sets into what we would call the way the world will develop, which is it will not be all of mankind being the people who will epitomize and actualize the purpose of creation. And the reason that there's nowhere trade backs at this point, as opposed to before, is there was still the reset, but there can't be another reset because the promise with the rainbow prevents that from ever happening. So at this point, it is a fait accompli. It is a done deal that there will be the concept of, okay, we'll use the term Jewish people, or that term doesn't really exist yet, but there will be the Jewish people and everyone else. And whenever the Jewish people become the Jewish people, which will not happen for several generations yet, they will be the people who will actualize the purpose of creation, and everyone else will have the ability to join them through conversion or not actualize the full purpose of creation. That being said, a non-Jew is able to achieve a portion in the next world. They are able to achieve a sense of accomplishment and greatness, but it is significantly less than that which a Jew or someone who has agreed, again, back to the last class, it's not you're born into something, although if you're Jewish, you happen to have a leg up because you're born into it. But if you're a convert, once you convert, you're equal. It's all the same. So ultimately, the line will eventually come from Avram and eventually from Yaakov and so on as the Bereshis will unfold. But at this point, there will be two different classes of people. There will be we'll call them the Jewish people, though that's not their name yet, and everyone else. And if you're from everyone else, your root, so to speak, is rooted in not the Jewish people. That means you are human. You are subject to the 7 base laws of humanity. You can achieve a sense of greatness, but that is nothing in compared to the closeness and the elevation that a Jew can achieve. And therefore, you have the choice to either convert or live your life out either as a proper non-Jew, or of course you have the choice to be a improper non-Jew and violate the 7 base commands, and then there will be no reward in the future. But that actually, although it develops from this point on, the division is now. Cham is out, Yefes is out, Shem will take 10 generations to finally sift out everyone else and get to Avram, and then even then, there's going to be further sifting till we get to Yaakov, and so on and so forth. But at this point, the Torah will now delineate, speak out, because for whatever reason, there needs to be 70 nations and the Jewish people. That seems to be something that was important in the way that Hashem runs the world. Even within the Jewish people, we'll go down as 70 people to Egypt with Yaakov. There's something with those numbers, but suffice it to say for now, this first division is going to be, you're going to get 70 nations. And of those 70 nations, one is going to eventually evolve and develop into the chosen nation, and everyone else will be human, will have the ability to achieve a certain level of greatness, but they're not the chosen people. They're not the ones who could achieve the purpose of creation. For the sense of description, the rabbis use 2 different terms for this, and this actually led to a great misunderstanding of a Talmudic teaching. It was actually used in many places as a source for a libel against the Jewish people historically. So the nations of the world are referred to as B'nai Noach, Ben Noach. That's how we use the expression, the 7 mitzvahs B'nai Noach, or in the English, you have a Noahide person. And the reason is very simple, because once you make the split, the common denominator of all people is Noach, whether you're from Shem, Cham, or Yafes, all of Cham, all of Yafes, and then all of Shem other than Yaakov, you then trace the single point as Noach. And as a Ben Noach, you are in the category known as, and really this is what Noach did for himself when he became the man of the ground, you are first primarily an inhabitant of this world. You are a human being. You can never think of yourself as an animal, like we talked about before with the clothing. You're not Jewish, but you are most definitely human. And that is the 7th mitzvah that gets thrown on the Ben Noach. You got to at least kill the animal before eating it, because animals rip an animal apart. For a Ben Noach to eat by just ripping a live animal and eat it, that already dehumanizes the Ben Noach. And the Ben Noach has to remember that he's a human being, even if he's not Jewish, but he is significantly greater than the animal world. And that becomes that 7th mitzvah, which is really, because the first 6 were really to all mankind. So that 7th mitzvah that becomes unique to the Ben Noach is going to be that, look, you're not Jewish, but you're human. So you can't eat from an animal while it's still alive. You got to kill it. Like, it's more humane. It's animalistic otherwise. And we pointed out when it comes to the commands of murder, it was specifically highlighted because you're killing another human being. That's a Selam Elokim. It doesn't matter you're Jewish or not Jewish, you're human. And that can never be lost on a person. But that being said, your focus is this world, because you're a Isha Adama, you're like Noach, like we say in Aleinu. They're the Goyei Ha'aratzos, right? When we talk about in Elie, when we contrast the Jews worshiping Hashem to the nations of the world worshiping idols and the like, we refer to them as the people of the land. And the idea is that they're descendants of Noah. Their focus is first and foremost building a civilized society, a livable experience. But it's primarily in this world. And if they succeed, there will be something of a next world. But the Jew, he lives in this world primarily to make that connection to God, which is the ultimate purpose of creation. And that, of course, is experienced in the next world. So whereas the non-Jew is going to be the Ben Noach, or the child of the man of the earth, or the Goyei HaRatzos, the nations of earth, and that's what the 7 mitzvahs really are. You're going to be a human being. You're not going to steal. You're going to worship God, and that's out of the question. Otherwise, you're going to have boundaries, property boundaries, whether it be in relationship. Adultery is usher to, is prohibited to Goyim, to non-Jews. Theft is prohibited. You can't curse God, right? That's out of bounds. You have to, if you don't have a relationship with God in some regards, then there's no starting point. And you have to have courts. You have to have a society. There has to be rules, justice, and that's it. You do that, and you will live a successful life. It will be primarily rooted in this world, and there'll be something left over for you in the next world. But then that's not the purpose of creation. The purpose of creation was to connect to God in totality, because that's the greatest goodness, like we said at the way beginning. And this world is simply the conduit to get there. That's still left for the one unique nation that will develop. What comes out is we, the Jewish people, are not called B'nai Noach. Okay, so we're called one of two things. Either B'nai Yisrael, which makes perfect sense because that's what we really are, because that is the final cutoff point, as we'll get through all the Sefer Bereshis. The last, switch is between Yaakov and Esav. That Esav would have been part of the line also. So we refer to ourselves as the B'nai Yisrael, and that makes perfect sense. The rest of the world are the B'nai Noach. We're the B'nai Yisrael. To refer to ourselves as B'nai Avram or B'nai Yitzchak doesn't make sense, because the Muslims are the B'nai Avram and the Christians are B'nai Yitzchak, just the same. So we're B'nai Yisrael. That makes sense. The Torah, in a couple places, refer to us as the B'nai Adam, okay, the children of man. And the Talmud understands that to mean that only the B'nai Yisrael are the children of man and not the Goyim. So what that means is, very simply, Adam, the man Adam, before the sin, is the last entity that ever existed that could have reached the full purpose of creation. So when we say we're the B'nai Yisrael, we're really saying we're the sons of Yaakov, and then we leap the sum total of mankind back to Adam before the sin, because we still have that potential. So when we're referred to as B'nai Adam, the son of man, it literally means not man as humankind, it means Adam, like Adam, the first man. The non-Jews took this Talmudic teaching throughout the ages, the Christians, and they said, look what the Talmud is teaching. The Talmud is teaching that the Gentiles are not human, because the Jews are the son of men and the Gentiles are not the son of men, right? And that's the translation. It's not a wrong translation. The interpretation is terribly wrong, because they took it to mean Jews descend from man, but Gentiles don't descend from man, rather animal. But that's not what the Talmud meant. The Talmud meant Jews descend from man, Adam, and Gentiles descend from Noah, in the sense that they can only get back to the Isha Adama, where we can get back to Adam HaRishon prior to the sin. So the confusion, or it may have been willful confusion because they may have known they were misinterpreting in order to rile up the masses. But the word sons of man can have a dual connotation. One is human and one is man, like that's his name. His name is man. What?
After the fact, they co-opted it. It's the Yoshki.
Oh, okay, that yes.
It's just interesting how they.
Yeah, for sure. But meaning what you're really saying is they used the Talmudic teaching to say the Jews were doing X, and then they took the lesson behind it and took it for themselves. Yeah, for sure. So it comes out that we then were being blamed for dehumanizing the Gentile. The bitter irony, of course, is we're the only religion that will teach just the opposite. The rest of the world is Ben Noach, and you're Ben Noach because you're human and not an animal. You just can't make the ultimate connection because you're only connected to 7 laws, not all 613. You don't have the Torah. You're not totally in. But on the contrary, that very 7th law, which defines the Ben Noach, is specifically to remind the Gentile that he is human and not an animal. And then they went around and they said that no, the Jew is the one teaching that the rest of the world are animalistic and they're the only human, when of course, again, the irony is that it's been the Jew who has been dehumanized by their oppressor and not the other way around.
It's the same thing. They teach that
the Jew
that can go to heaven.
Right. But it's much worse the other way. In other words, the non-believer is doomed and the like.
They're
excluded, right? So that becomes terribly ironic, but it's doubly ironic because the very concept in Judaism to refer to the non-Jew, the guy becomes a pejorative in the more recent, not yesterday, the last 600-700 years, right? But really, from the Talmudic sense, it would be you're a Ben Noach or you're Ben Yisrael, you're a Jew or a guy, okay, you're a Jew or a non-Jew, okay, Jew or Gentile would be the nice English way. But the point is that you have this Talmudic teaching that Jews are B'nai Adam and non-Jews are not B'nai Adam, and it's teaching the very point that non-Jews are viewed as the spiritual heirs of Noach. Jews are viewed as the spiritual heir of Adam prior to the sin, connected then to Yaakov, and then going forward. Whereas they took it to mean, no, Jews are human and non-Jews are not human. And again, it's the furthest from the Jewish teaching, which is the non-Jew specifically needs to remember that he is human and not an animal, and he has 7 laws to achieve a proper existence in this world. And again, there's something for him in the next world also. But again, if you're not part of the chain that gets you back to Adam before the sin through the Torah, then you're going to miss out on the ultimate purpose of creation, which is connecting to God 100%. Whereas they will connect to God through the 7 mitzvahs at a lower percent. I can't tell you what the relative percents are, but that's how it comes out. So now we get the description of the 70 nations. Now, from just a general geographic sense, the children of Yefes are understood to have gone from, let's say, the Middle East, East and Northeast. Ham is understood to have gone southwest into Israel, Egypt, and Africa. And Shem would have been stuck in the Mesopotamian Middle Eastern area. We do have clear definitions of many of these nations. We have less definition on more of them that we can pinpoint who they are. But when you go through just a quick list, which is at the beginning of chapter 10, Perek Yud, so these are the generations of the sons of Noach. And again, the Torah needs to delineate because these are the 70 nations that are going to be the B'nai Noach of the world. They're going to make the bulk of mankind. So you have the sons of Yefet, you have Gomer, Magog. Now, Magog is most famous because the prophet speaks of the king Gog, who ruled from Magog, who's going to be involved in some major battle in the Messianic era. That's where his fame comes from. There are those that have sources to indicate this may be a reference to Chinese and the like, because in China, Magog is a term that is found. It's not my research, it's other people's research, but that's pure speculation. Madai is Media, that we know is in part of Iran, was Media. Yavan is Greece, which we are well familiar with where Greece is. Tuval is not as well-known, Meshach, and then Tiras is Persia. So the Yefes is going to be from Iran going eastward and then going northward into Europe. That seems to be where the Bnei Yefes expanded to initially. Okay, then within Gomer, who's one of the Bnei Yefes, so the only name that we have a good familiarity with is Ashkenaz, which is generally understood to be Germany. So that would be, again, up north into the European continent. Rifas and Togarma, we don't have a great idea of. The Bnei Yavan, this would be the Grecian islands and the like. Elisha, Tarshish. Tarshish comes up in the story of in Yonah. They mentioned the city of Tarshish. Kitim, Dodanim, these seem to be in the Mediterranean, in the Greek area. These are Yefes's territory. And then you get in verse Vav, you start talking about Ham. Now, when you get to the sons of Ham, you get to Cush, which is generally understood to be Ethiopia, Mitzrayim, which is definitely understood to be Egypt, Put, which is undefined, and Canaan, which would be the occupiers of Israel. So you're talking about from Israel going down southward into Africa, and that would be your descendants of Ham. Then we say the sons of Cush are Siva and Chavila, Sabta, Rama, Sabdacha, and Shiva and Dedan. The only of those nations that really comes prominent is Shiva, because we have the queen of Shiva interacts with Shlomo, and it seems to be that is again an African nation. Cush gives birth to Nimrod. Now that's particularly important because Nimrod becomes a critical player on the world scene. As the verse says, Hu heichel lios giber ba'aretz, he becomes the first mighty man. And Hu haya gibor tzayed lifnei Hashem, he becomes a mighty hunter in the presence of God. And therefore, they say he's like Nimrod as the mighty hunter in front of God. The Torah leaves Nimrod off. We will get back to Nimrod in the Tower of Babel. We will get back to Nimrod in the War of the 4 Kings and the 5 Kings. But for right now, he is just singled out as the most unique and powerful descendant of, actually he descends from Canaan. He's going to come from Cush. From Cush, right. Okay, now he starts ruling in Babylon, which means that even though his people seem to have gone more south, he established a kingdom in Babylon, which is Iraq. And then you have other names, Erech, Akkad, Kelana, and Eretz Shinar, which is the Iraqi area. Now, from this land, Ashur, Assyria, who is a Semite, he flees Nimrod, and he settles in what's northern Iraq. That's where Assyria is. And he builds the city of Nineveh, which of course is famous in the Jonah story as being the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Okay, and then Rehovazir and Kalach, Resen, these are other cities. Now we get to Mitzrayim. Okay, Mitzrayim we know is definitely Egypt. He gives birth to Ludim, Anamim, Lahavim, Naftuchim, which we're not familiar with per se. As Pasrusim, as Kasluchim, that go from there, and ultimately the Plishtim come out. The Plishtim are a nation that plagued the Jews throughout history. Avimelech is the first that we know. He's the king of the Plishtim. He interacts with Avram and with Yitzchak. Plishtim is the west coast of Israel, just northeast of Egypt, in the what we would call the modern day Gaza Strip. because the capital of the Plishti territory is Gaza. And there is no question that the Palestinians took their name. It's really Roman. Rome assigned the name to that area way back when, after they conquered it. So they took the Plishtim who lived and they called it Palestine, and that devolved out, and therefore the non-Jewish residents of Israel became Palestinians. It really started in the Roman occupation 2,000 years ago, and then it went out of use because it wasn't important. And then once the state was founded, or the years when the Jews started returning, it became important to become a Palestinian again. And okay,
That's right, in 1964.
that's modern history.
That's right, in 1964. The Jews were called Palestinians prior to.
Oh, even that, because that was the secular name of the territory.
Oh, that's what they called it. That was just the region.
Right, it's called Palestine.
Oh,
Okay, that
by Balfour.
it's the Palestine. Okay. All right, then Canaan gives birth to Sidon, which is generally understood to be in Lebanon, and Ches, Yevusi, Amori. These are all the nations that occupy Israel when the Jews conquer. So again, the sons of Canaan, the sons of Ham are really going to be Israel, and then down into Africa. Okay, then we finish up the Canaanim, and then we skip down to Kaf Aleph, and we get to the Semites. And a lot of these names will be familiar. They're, again, all in the Syria, Iraq, Turkey area. You'll have Elam, which is in Iraq, Ashur, which is Assyria, Aram, which is Syria, not Assyria, but Syria, and the like. Okay, now the two things to focus on right here is tangential to the story, but it's amazing how the Torah, just spelling out names, will like teach us potentially, literally, earth-shattering. That's not just an expression here. It's going to be it's a purposeful pun, but earth-shattering information, because in the generations of Shem, who incidentally is the one line that can and will produce the chosen people. So you have some really big tzaddikim, and Shem himself is understood to be a big tzaddik. He has a child, a great-grandchild who's going to be Aver, and they, of course, are known in Chazal as having the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. So they were definitely on board. They did not achieve what Avram achieved to actually start the line that would be the Jewish people directly, but they certainly were important continuations. They kept things going properly. They were definitely considered to be righteous people. And it's Aver's child that I want to focus on right now, because it's an amazing concept. Aver has two children. One of them is Peleg. Now, Peleg is, the word in Hebrew is to divide. The sages say that Aver was a prophet, and he named his child based on a prophecy, Ki biyamav niflaga haaretz, that in his days the land would be divided. Okay, so Rashi does the calculation, and this is a clear reference to the event of the Tower of Babel. Okay, just to put things into perspective, because sometimes we lose this perspective. Noah gets off the boat in the year 1657 from creation. The flood is 1656. The Tower of Babel is going to take place in about the year 1996 from creation. So you're talking about 340 years from Noah getting off the boat to building the tower. You have about 4 or 5 generations. You have Shem, then you have Aram, you have Shem, you have Arpachshad. Arpachshad gives birth to Shelach. Shelach gives birth to Aver. Aver gives birth to Peleg. So you have 5 generations, and again, they're living longer lives. 300 some years pass. Peleg is going to be born or die, one of the two. He's going to, in the year that the earth gets split, and that's prophetically why he's named that way. It's got to be when he dies. Otherwise, it's not prophetic. It's what happened. Okay, so now, what does it mean the earth split? So conventionally, when you read the Tower of Babel's story, which we'll get to probably, if not tonight, the first thing next time, or maybe even tonight. The Tower of Babel story is going to involve the climax being God separates the people, sends them on their way, and mixes up their language. And the idea was that everyone came to a single point, which we'll get to in a moment, and they had their plan, what they wanted to do. God didn't like their plan and scattered them. And that is what it seems to be from the story. If that's true, which it is, then this event is being told to us in the Torah in the context of just who are the 70 nations and what their names are. And on this name, since it was a prophetic name and had a connection to a very important historical event, we're told this is when the land was divided. If you take the simple reading, the land being divided and the people being split are not exactly the same thing, but you'll explain what does it mean the land is divided. It doesn't mean the land is divided. It means the people are divided throughout the land, as opposed to all being in one location. They were divided all over the earth. Okay. Many understand, though, that cheapens the literal reading of the Torah, which is the earth was divided. Not only that, but it answers what is a very basic question, which is, how do you get people to scatter throughout the earth? So the way the Medrash teaches it is they couldn't communicate with each other. So one guy would ask for a hammer, the other guy would bring him a screwdriver, and they would beat each other up because they weren't communicating. Okay, that's nice. It's a good, it makes for a good point. So I could go in my neighborhood and you can go into your neighborhood. What exactly is going to be my motivation to go to another country or to go to the world's big place? Everyone's in one place. So many understand that what happened in the Tower of Babel punishment was the earth literally split. The earth, which had been one single land mass, which we will demonstrate is explicitly said in the Torah, was one single land mass throughout the days of the flood, throughout the days leading up until the Tower of Babel. And the way that God got all the nations to scatter was pretty simple. The earth started shaking and moving, and everyone, A, ran for their lives, and B, got on little chunks of land that literally moved and spread all over the world. So if you look at Gracious, the creation story, which we did not focus on so much because it is more esoteric than not, but we do see a clear description of the way the earth looked in chapter 1, pasuk 9, Aleph Tes, page 5. God said, it's the third day, let the waters beneath the heaven be gathered into one area, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God calls the dry land earth, and the gathering of water he calls seas. So if you ask me, the way the world looks at creation is, you have one piece of land, you have one water mass surrounding the piece of land, and then the Torah describes, and you have rivers and streams cutting through the land. But basically, you have the land mass surrounded by the sea with rivers cutting through. What happens in the days of Enosh, which we said there was a partial flood, there is some flooding of the land. Some of the waters are encroaching on the land and submerging the ground. Okay, then you have the big flood, but then that dries out. And then you have the division of the earth, where God takes the one land mass and scatters it in all different directions. Seas now fill in the missing gaps. The earth now is no longer a single land mass. It is several chunks of land spread out all over the globe. Now, coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, scientists believe the same thing happened. Their study comes from the plates on the earth, and apparently if you just take a globe and imagine it to be a puzzle, you just put it right back together and it fits really nicely together. So this concept is actually probably true, because I've never studied all the science of plate tectonics or not, but it's explicitly in the Torah. It's black and white. So I have no doubt that the earth was one landmass and split during the days of the Tower of Babel. This is how people got all over the earth, because they were on pieces of land that literally moved to different parts of the earth. We talked about the Australia, the island, and all that. Every question that was ever asked about how did the island animals get to the boat for the flood are all meaningless questions. There were no islands yet. In Noah's time, the earth was one piece of land. All that happened later. The Australian animals did not have a problem getting to the boat because there was no Australia. It was just the edge of the world, like everything else was. And the big problem that comes from the scientific view is that my understanding of the scientific approach, and I'm not a scientist, tend to be, but I believe the idea is that if you look right now, the plates are moving. So they are moving at whatever infinitesimally small rate per hour, day, year, whatever it is. So if you're a scientist, and you wouldn't be a scientist if you didn't think this way, if it's moving at this rate today, that means it was moving at this rate yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before. And that's a totally legitimate, rational way to view the information in front of you. So if I have X number of miles between Brazil and North Africa, and that's where the piece fits in, and that's where the plates line up, and it's moving at X number of centimeters, whatever meters, I can do simple math and figure out that it took this many years to move that rate, because that would be a very legitimate conclusion to draw. It doesn't allow for, and science doesn't allow for this, but it doesn't allow for the fact that in one fell swoop, it was all moved 99% of the distance and was stopped and is now moving from that point ever so slowly. But the truth is that it did not split eons ago. It actually split about 3,700 years ago, which is relatively short, and I don't know what this would do to modern geology or the like, but it would certainly cause a re-understanding of everything they know, because everything is rooted in a mountain forms, because things are moved. Yeah, except that if you crush the ground together in one fell swoop, it's going to create the same result in a fraction of the time, which can happen if God does it. And the truth is, the Torah really says, black and white, that this is what happened. It explains, the narrative makes a lot of sense, how the nation split. That was the punishment, that mankind really was meant to be one cohesive unit, and they all would have lived on one plot of land. The fact that the world split, literally isolated large swaths of mankind for lots and lots of time. The people who ended up in the Americas were essentially isolated from the rest of the world for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And this was all part of the punishment of the Tower of Babel. Now, everything I've said in this regard is not my own. It's brought down by many Jewish thinkers and the like. But I'm going to say this part is my own. So you could call me crazy for this part. The other part, you're free to decide what you want, but it's not mine. It's earthquakes. That's a natural result of the splitting.
The plates pushing
right
together.
It's just that, look, I don't know before the Tower of Babel if the plates were even moving. I don't know. But once the land was split, then whatever scientific reality that exists today that was the new normal, as we like that expression. So once God split the earth and moved the plates and set them in motion, and I move it, and then so now they move, and now there are earthquakes. Were there not earthquakes before? It's possible. I don't know. I don't know.
God set boundaries before all this happened.
To
Because of Tesla, it
in
sets the boundaries.
you're talking about by nature, or which test valve? Which? Oh, that's all after this.
Before.
Right. Those divisions are all after the Tower of Babel because they were all together in the Tower of Babel. When we say they all split, right? That's where they went out after those couple hundred years elapsed because they had all gathered in the year 1996 from creation in Babylon.
Yeah, but this was before.
Right.
And Canaan began.
Right. That's all the ultimate spreading out of, meaning the Torah is telling the story.
Discussing now when he says casting the sons.
Right, meaning the sons will eventually expand into that part of the word, but it didn't mean that they necessarily that day. Right, meaning the Torah is describing the 70 nations and how they're going to develop, right?
Yeah.
And then goes back, once we get to the 70 nations, then we tell the story that split them all up because they really
But
came.
in between getting to the 70 nations, he says in the boundaries.
Right, because that's what's going to be the right. Okay, so this is just and this is my contribution to Torah. Feel free to think I'm crazy, but I think if it's not right, it certainly could be right. That's what I'll tell you. One of the sons of Mitzrayim are the Lehavim. If you look in verse 13, so Mitzrayim begat Ludim, Anamin, Lehavim. Okay, now Lehav is a word that means something in Hebrew. So Lehav is a torch. Okay, that's just what it means. I think the best place that we have that is the angel that stood outside of Gan Eden, that we said metaphorically referred to the angel of death, that you can't get back to Gan Eden without dying. So that angel is said to be holding a flaming sword. And I believe the sword is, I think the word Lahav comes in over there. That would be, it says Lahat. Okay, it's just flipping. Okay, in any case, Lahav is the word for a flame. That's just what it means. So Rashi comments, let's see if he brings it down in the English here. It'd be nice if he does. He doesn't. Does he? No. Okay, Lahav means a flame. So Rashi describes that the reason why the Lahavim were called Lahavim, so Rashi says Shepnehem, their complexion, Domim Lalahav, was similar to a torch, to a flame. So I would understand that to mean a redskin, because the redskins would have the complexion that would be most similar to a torch, to a fire. So if most of the children of Ham were dark, because Ham was the dark one of the three, so then it would be, the Lahav would be not dark, but would be a reddish dark thing. So a reddish dark person who is a descendant of Mitzrayim means he's hanging near Mitzrayim, would put him, in my theory, to the western side of Egypt, or would be, if the single landmass would be, you'd have Egypt, and then you'd have the Lahavim. When the earth splits and Egypt gets left in Africa, the Lahavim end up in what becomes South America. So that's where you get the same people who were experienced in the pyramid building, all these connections between the ancient Egyptians and the original Indians or the original Aztec South American people will, in my opinion, this is just my thing, is that's because they all started together, and the Lahavim, the Redskins, they ended up in South America after the split, because that's what happened to the African South. That's where the split right? They ended up in Brazil. They ended up going up north through Mexico to America. And that's how you get your Indian people in North America specifically. Why the Redskins ended up in North America is because they were on the other side of the division in what we call Africa. And this would also explain the tremendous similarity that people discovered between the cultures of Egypt, and which again geographically is close, but there's a huge Atlantic Ocean separating the two. So then you're gonna have to come up with, they were boat people, they were good, they were able to travel, and that's all good. I'm sure that's how they teach it in school. But I would suggest much easier is that they just were in one fell swoop or switched from each other and went and lived in their lives. This is my conjecture.
And LaHavra mean the color that's associated with fire is yellow.
Oh.
So if LaHavra was yellow, then it would be
I see.
India.
So it could be, but I have different reason to believe that again, that Magog, that the Yefes, they went more east, the Canaanim went more west. So it would work better. Although again, it's a conjecture, it's a theory. What does come out though, according to this approach, and I believe it's the simple reading of the text. It's actually supported by Midrashim as well, which is the land did not, the people did not merely scatter at the Tower of Babel. The land literally split. That facilitated the mass movement all of a sudden where people spread out. That's how certain people got lost. Like whoever happened to be on the part that became Australia, they essentially became disconnected from civilization for years and years and years and years until people figured to travel and go. But whoever was stuck in the bigger mainland would have stayed relatively together. There would be the Europeans, the Asians, and the Africans. And the people who got on the Western hemisphere and Australia, they, so to speak, got separated out. And then even within that area, they describe how the Mediterranean filled in when Europe split off from Africa. So then the water came rushing in, and the world effectively changed. Right. And all of that is, again, a relatively recent development, because as far as we're concerned, the world really only has about 5,800 years of existence in the way we.
It makes sense too, because you look at the equator lines and how they divvy out, even in South America and in Philippines, where they found other pyramids, they're all along with
They're on the same line. It was just like, okay, you have as much fun with this as you want. For us, though, it brings us to the event that precipitated this great split, which is going to be the event of the Tower of Babel. But very important, so we don't lose the historical context, is it's only 300 and so years later. Now, we know that Peleg, right, is dying at that point. He's from an earlier generation. The later generations, the descendants of Shem and Aver, have already been born. And we will focus on how Avraham, who is the 10th generation from Shem, is already he's born in the year 1948 from creation. So in 1996, he is 48 years old. He is already a person of importance. And that is the underpinning of the Tower of Babel story, because it's going to be the next major divide of mankind, because it's going to separate Abraham on one side and the rest of the world on the other side. And that will be the underpinnings of the Tower of Babel. And that's what we'll start in next week, Perek Yud Aleph, which will be Shvi of Noah. Okay.